One of the most problematic issues in the Bible is the actual dating of the Bible, of dating of events, which is one of the reasons why we deconstruct from the Bible. So when I say dating of the Bible, it's the fact that the Bible does not indicate itself to be actual history, because the dating of the Bible does not fit with most of our known history, especially when we're speaking of the Old Testament. Because in the Old Testament, you have two different styles of dating. One style based on the Masoretic text and the other style based on the Septuagint. Now, the difference between this Masoretic text and the Septuagint is actually 650 years. The Septuagint has the creation of the world beginning around 4650 BCE, whereas the Masoretic text has it in and around 4,000 years even, or sometimes 3,967. The biggest issue that these things cause is the fact that there are certain things become impossible based on the knowledge that we have today. For instance, if you were to go by the Masoretic text, then the flood of Noah would have happened in or around 2,300, 2,200 BCE. But according to Egyptologists who believe that the pyramids were built by Khufu, that would place the pyramids being built in around 2,500 BCE. Now, I do not agree that it was built during the time frame of Khufu. I believe that it was built much earlier than Khufu. But here's the issue. Even if the building of the Great Pyramids of Giza were done during the time frame of Khufu, that would mean that they were built prior to Noah's flood. And if they were built prior to Noah's flood, then they would show water damage. They would show water erosions that would have happened during that time frame. But the pyramids show no such water erosion or water damage. So the pyramids could not have been built prior to this worldwide flood, which is according to the Noah story. So the way that the Masoretic text determined the date was by looking at who reigned and looking at births in chronological order. This person begat that person, they was this age, and then they begat that person at that age, and so on and so forth. The Septuagint also uses the reign of kings as well as who begat whom during these time frames, but the Septuagint goes a bit further into identifying the reigns of actual kings, and goes a bit further in identifying who was born when and at what time and how old they were when they had children. Through this type of dating, the Septuagint gets the 4,650 years, but the Masoretic text gets the 4,000 BCE time frame. Some of the problems also occur because you have statements in the Bible that don't make sense as far as figuring out the time. According to Exodus, the Israelites were in captivity in Egypt for 430 years in captivity. But according to Paul in Galatians, the Egyptians, the 430 years also encompasses the time frame of Abraham all the way to Moses. So the portion of captivity is not exactly 430 years. And we have a discrepancy or a contradiction between the two, the Old Testament Exodus and the New Testament Galatians. Now, one of the other dating that they use in the Masoretic text is to say that the Exodus happened 430 some odd years after the Temple of Solomon was built, which creates a whole nother problem because it does not match what the Septuagint actually has in place. So we get this 650 year time gap. And because of this time gap, it doesn't work. Now, one of the problems of the Old Testament is that it also excludes the name of certain people in order to identify the time frame to which it happened. Most Christians who are following the Masoretic text believe that the Exodus happened during the 18th dynasty of Egypt. But when you read Exodus, there is nothing in Exodus that would indicate the 18th dynasty, as it just names him Pharaoh. The same thing when you read Genesis and you're looking at when Abraham pimped out Sarah to Pharaoh. Now, it tells you that he pimped them out to Amalek, but it doesn't tell you which Pharaoh was reigning at the time frame. So it doesn't leave anything that where you can identify the era to which it was speaking of. I accept that these vague things were stated in order for no one to be able to challenge whether or not these stories are true or are they false. But because of that, we have to look at these stories and think that there must be something off concerning these stories if they were unwilling to match them up with the pharaohs or whomever was in charge during those time frames. Now, I believe that one of the reasons why this was done is because in the 8th century BCE, when these books were being edited, they recognized that people of that era knew that the Levant was a vassal state during the time frame that they would claim this Exodus happened, that they were a vassal state of Egypt. And if they said that they were under Egyptian control but came to the promised land through Moses and through Joshua, they conquered all these people, that those conquering Israelites would have had to occur at the time frame that Egypt actually controlled the Levant, and therefore they would know that the story is not true. Because Egypt did not lose control of the Levant until around 1100 BCE, which only gives them about 300 years to be able to have their Joshua story, their conquering story, their Saul story, as well as their David and Solomon story to bring you to the time frame of Hezekiah. But since they knew they couldn't do that, they left the names of the pharaohs out. And they also knew that there was some other issues. According to the Masoretic text, Saul came into power at 1 year old and reigned for 2 years. But according to other stories, Saul was a grown man when he was dealing with David, and David started his Davidic kingdom. So knowing that those would be issues, they left it vague enough so that you couldn't pinpoint it to a certain time frame, and therefore wouldn't have the ability to be able to question the things that were being said. Now, after around 700 BCE, when the extra biblical histories are being written, as far as the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians and the Greeks, the histories are pretty accurate as to what was going on in the Levant area as far as who ruled them, not as far as the prophecies and the miracles and things of that nature, but as far as who ruled them, which is where the Septuagint and the Masoretic texts do find agreement. It is in those first 5 books in the books of Joshua where the disagreement comes and the 650-year difference lies, which means that both cannot be true. So therefore, you either have to pick and choose which one you're going to go with, but no matter which one you choose, they both, at the end of the day, are completely wrong. Because we know more history today than the people who understood history and archaeology did back then. And so we know the different kingdoms, we know the different people, we know that the Israelites were never in Egypt as slaves in the numbers to which they spoke of. There was never an Exodus. We know that a worldwide flood did not occur in the year 2300 or any of the years in and around that time frame, that these flood myths are myths that came and happened supposedly thousands of years prior. But we also know that the Younger Dryas flood, which rose sea levels to 400 feet, happened in and around 12,000 to 9,000 BCE. And we do see evidence of that all around the world. But the flood stories, the flood myths, are not told until at least 3,000 years later. Because the first flood story, the oldest flood story that we have, is the Sumerian flood story in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was being told by the Sumerians 3,000 years after the supposedly event happened. And since the Sumerians were in or around that 7,000 to 6,000 BCE time frame, that would put it closer to the 9,000, 12,000 time frame of the Younger Dryas period. Not saying that Gilgamesh actually existed, not saying that at all. Not saying the Anunnaki existed, not saying that at all. But their story is more accurate to what we actually find in archaeology and geology. So y'all have a great day. And remember always, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.